Hello, my Nyctophiliacs. This is Filia Noctis, daughter of darkness. Tonight, I have a story of true love, marriage, and death. The author of this chilling tale is Reddit writer Aakash Sharma. So sit back, close your eyes, and enjoy the comforts of the dark. Till Death Do Us Part by Aakash Sharma.
Natalie always hated those words. They made such a joyful occasion, a union of two people in love, sound morbid and utterly ominous. Yet she dreamed of the day that she would hear those words come from John, when he would get married to her. She, however, felt like it wasn't going to happen anytime soon. Yes, they were engaged, but John was dying. The war hadn't been over yet, and whatever was left of their little town was in no shape for a marriage. Sure, he had promised her that after the war was over, he would come home like a hero from one of Natalie's novels and carry her straight to the church where they would get married for the entire town to see. Her father would walk her down the aisle, through smiling faces, while John's mother watched. Little children tossing around flowers and the church organ playing while one of those chubby priests wed them. She had always wanted to lean in for the kiss before the priest had even finished. She knew the whole town would tell tales of her wedding after that. Sadly, reality was much grimmer. The novel always seemed to make their lovers seem almost invulnerable, oblivious to the dangers of the world, and innocent to the depravities of man. Losing a leg was one thing, but it seemed to Natalie that John had lost his sanity somewhere in the country they had sent him to. He would never talk of what he witnessed there that had sent his mind into such a chaotic state, yet it would always be in there with him. It was as if he was married to those horrible things he lived through, rather than this woman, the one he loved and promised his heart to. Their talks would be limited to him complaining about pain and sobs with incomprehensible confessions of a man at war. Natalie, you are the woman I love with all my heart. And when the time comes, I want you to do something for me. Please do not refuse me this favor. Natalie, it is the only thing that I need, the only thing that will save me, save us, he told her. Of course, anything. There's nothing I wouldn't do for you, she said, giving him warmth with her calloused hands, which were once tender and affectionate. There is something I want you to have. A box of wood I found. I want you to open it when it's time, Natalie. I want you to open it and do nothing but let it stay open. Please, Natalie, trust me. Yes, I would, she said with a sigh. She knew very well there was no such box. John had rambled on about this box in certain periods, a shattered mind trying to put itself together. Do you know what I mean by the right time? He asked, like he had many times before. I do not know. Please tell me, she replied with false enthusiasm, as the doctor had told her to do. He wasn't trained in the medicine of the mind. It was hard to find anyone who was, but the old man had told her that the mind wants to believe what it needs to believe, and preventing it from doing so might collapse it. John tried to hold back tears, as he had many times before. I want you to kill me, Natalie, please. I know that we are to get married, but I am not strong enough. Things that I have seen just won't leave me alone. That would give me peace. Natalie, now tired of playing this game for almost what she assumed was a whole month, just gave him a kiss on the forehead and tied a cloth around his head. You are sick, my love. Do not think such things. Sometimes she tried to imagine the things that he must have seen, but she could never picture anything quite so maddening. Whatever it was, It must have been absolutely devastating. She had never seen someone act this way. She had heard of other men who had come back from the ongoing war, leaving part of themselves behind on the field. But neither her old father or her young brother got drafted to fight. Why was God so harsh with her? All she wanted to do was to be married to the man she loved, a man who would be a war hero, fighting gloriously for their country in this worldwide anarchy. It was the same thing every day. Go to the factory and work for 6 hours a day, then back home with her parents, then to John's place to care for him. His mother was too old to be taking care of him on her own. It was him who was supposed to be taking care of the poor lady, but time can be cruel. Natalie had made up her mind. She was tired of all the pretending, the facade of a normal life. Their love was anything but normal, and she was going to use the power of this love to bring John back to the man he once was. So what if he lost a leg? He would still be John, who, right now, he wasn't. Lord, please give me the strength. She prayed like the good Catholic she was raised to believe. The Lord hears you. You are, after all, his own child. He loves you and will help you find your way, even if it seems like he had to look away from the world right now. Please give me my John back. She'd made up her mind. She would beg the Lord for his help until he finally looked back at her with a smile and gave her love back. She got up early and went to the church. She'd already let John's mother know that she would not be able to come and help John that day. It was only a day. It couldn't harm anyone. And besides, she was doing this for him, wasn't she? Then she prayed. She sat in front of Mary's statue and she prayed. She prayed all day. She prayed all night. She took no breaks to rest, no breaks to eat. In her mind, this was the right way to help John. Their love was like a novel, and this is how a woman in her place would have helped John. Sometimes she broke into tears from the sudden realization of John's condition. Sometimes she would smile back at fond memories of the past, when John took her up the hill where they spoke for hours, where even the silence seemed to be so exciting. This was all going to be over soon, and she could live her life just the way she imagined it would be. She awoke, tired and hungry, her body so weak from the constant praying that she felt like a corpse. But she had to know. She had to know what her devotion got her. John was probably waiting eagerly for her to be back, smiling and happy, the plaguing memories overpowered by his lover's faith. She had even gotten him a particularly beautiful crucifix, one she'd always had an eye on when she was at the church. It was crimson on the sides, with a very intricate gold and silver carving around the edges and tied to a string of beautiful red beads. It had cost quite a significant sum she had saved from the factory earnings for their wedding, but she promised herself that it would be worth it. She found him asleep when she got there. Mrs. Marino had been resting downstairs after the constant care she gave her boy, a well-deserved time off. She didn't care about anything now. All she needed to know was if it worked. She bent over and kissed him on the forehead like she had many times before. John opened his eyes, coming back to consciousness, away from those awful nightmares that Natalie had hoped were replaced by pleasant dreams. "Natalie?" he asked, looking directly into her green eyes, which were now beginning to moisten with tears of joy. She had a strong feeling in her heart, one that told her it had worked. "Natalie, my love," he spoke, unmoving from his resting position. "John," she said with a smile. "Would you do me a favor, Natalie? The box. There's a box I need you to find." The world crashed around Natalie. Her smile widened out of an uncontrollable feeling of ridicule. "Box, my love?" she replied through a shaky voice, her eyes now drowning in tears. "There is..." John was abruptly cut off. The crucifix Natalie had gotten him, the tip piercing through his neck as he tried to scream, but to no avail. She went at it again and again until all that was left of him was a cold, lifeless, and bloody corpse laying in the bed with the bottom tip of the crucifix standing upright in his neck. She then sat down beside him, breaking down into tears and screaming at the top of her lungs. Word got around the little town very quickly. John C. Marino, a young man drafted into the war, who came back with a broken soul, had finally taken his own life, plagued by grisly memories of warfare. Such a horrible way to go for a young man, but there were worse ways to go, worse ways that he was lucky enough to have avoided during his time in the service. What was worse, that he had left poor Natalie behind, the girl the entire town knew was deeply in love with him. She felt sick whenever she saw their pitiful stares her way. She knew what she did, and although her pain was real, so was her guilt. She didn't cry when they took his lifeless corpse away from the house. She didn't cry at the funeral when she saw him lying there so lifeless, with the blood cleaned and him clad in a handsome black suit. She hoped to see him so only at that very special day she had thought about since she was young, which never came. Her knight in shining armor lay lifeless in front of her own eyes, his eyes shut in peace, away from the world that had broken him. But she did cry when she saw what he held, the wooden box in his two pale hands, one that Mrs. Marino had kept hidden and safe in the house, letting it stay a secret so as to not have anyone steal it. The box had been very real, and it was beautiful. It had little winged baby angels carved on it with such skill and detail they would have been lifelike if not just simple carvings on wood. Her sorrow turned to anger when she realized that Mrs. Marino had hidden it from her all along, claiming that there was no such box. Her anger turned to hatred on witnessing the burial. When it was Mrs. Marino's funeral, she felt nothing for the woman. Old people fall down the stairs all the time. Nothing very odd about it. And besides, how stable could an old woman who had recently lost her son even be? People were too busy pitying the bad luck of the Marino family to notice the slightest hint of a smile on Natalie's face. She did her own justice, even if it was credited as an accident. John must have been cursed by something. Those foreign lands are dangerous. That was the general belief. How ignorant of them. She was the one who was cursed. She was the one who was robbed of a future she always dreamt of. No matter, she could still have that future. Michael, he was a good man. He was drafted to the war as well, but he wasn't so unlucky as to lose his mind like John. He was trained in medicine, and they needed people like him there. He did not fight much. Those weren't his duties. Instead, he did the noble work of looking after the wounded. Was this the man she'd always dreamt of? A noble spirit who healed other men? A man who wanted to dedicate his own life to saving that of others? A man whose work was to give other men hope at a time when it was needed the most? Perhaps. When she lay in his arms at night, awaiting the morning sun for another day to spend together, she knew that she was finally going to be happy and live the life she deserved. She'd found her knight who'd never carried a weapon. It was a few years after the war ended, and now the time was coming closer. They were to be married in a few days, and things had been busy ever since. Natalie kept going through a bunch of bridal wear. She was going to look like a princess. She was going to make Michael feel so special, and his friends so jealous. She could imagine her father's pride when he walked her to get married. Her mother may weep, but wasn't that what made the perfect marriage? The morning had arrived, and her friends had helped her with her look. She looked absolutely gorgeous. Her hair was done upwards just the way she wanted, and her veil was ready to be put on. But just before she could step out, she needed some time to herself. In that silence, she could still hear the murmurs and the giggles of her friends outside. But this wasn't the time to listen to that. She wanted to reflect for a while. She was plagued by the memories of her past at times. But then again, those things never happened, right? John was a poor, poor soul who had been crushed by the nightmarish war and ended up opening his own throat. And his mother, in grief, had not paid attention as she went down the stairs, cracking her head on the way down. They also probably felt no pain. Also, they were better off dead in a way. They were both in pain, and they needed the sweet release of death, which definitely came upon them by their own hands. They did want to die. Yes, that was it. They wanted to die, so death came to them and took them away from their misery. That's precisely what happened. This was the first day of her life, and whatever was behind her remains behind her. The town folks know that she deserved happiness after such a traumatic past. Yes, she deserved this. She deserved this more than anyone. She earned this. A knock on the door made her jump, but only slightly. She knew it was time. She took a deep breath, stood herself up, and set the veil right, letting the past out with her breath. The door opened, and there stood her father, dressed in a nice suit that he had worn back when, but there was something wrong. He smelt different. His hands, they felt so cold. She looked up at him slowly, and when she did get a good look at his face, she felt her heart sink in dread. "Come, my child," he spoke through a hoarse voice from a loosely hanging jaw. His skin was cold and pale, and his eyes, they had lost all color as well. He looked down at her with an off-green color, as if it had been corroding slowly. One would assume that he would have been blind, but he very much could see her. She froze, but for some reason her legs moved with the walking corpse of her father, down the hall and onto the aisle. The church organs played loud as she walked down the column, her deceased father's hand in her warm hand. The church was full of people wearing good clothes that seemed to be worn down with rot, just like their skin. A child with a basket crawling on the floor, its body so rotten it was even unable to stand. The dead looked straight at the bride with glistening, colorful skin and a new and glowing white dress. Their skulls seemed to be fixated, but to Natalie they looked like sneers, forever stuck on the face of attending corpses. If only she could find Michael here, it would comfort her. This was a bad dream, nothing more. All she needed to do was wake up. She bit into her tongue a little, feeling the pain as she expected to feel. No, this couldn't be. This was not real. As she came up to the altar, she finally spotted Michael. He was at one of the church organs. She broke free from her father's tight grip and ran to Michael and held him in an embrace. As he turned to face her, she quickly averted her eyes. His face was the only skin on his skeleton, the rest of the body concealed by a suit. A very familiar suit. One that she saw John buried in, worn down with time. She grew pale in horror, realizing who the groom was, turning around to see the corpse of John wearing the suit that Michael was supposed to be wearing. There were certain patches of skin that appeared to be sewn onto the places where there appeared to be once exposed bone, and she knew for a fact that those patches were made by the skin of the man she was supposed to marry. "Isn't it perfect?" John said through a rotted voice, hoarse with time. It... Natalie looked around. Children tossing flowers around, people looking at her with smiles, her father standing with a proud look on his face, Mrs. Marino sitting in the front row with a misshapen skull. "It," Natalie said again, now a tear going down from her eye. "It's perfect," she said, smiling through tears. John smiled back, and the child walked forward now, carrying the basket with his teeth. It contained flower petals and a box. A lovely wooden box with baby angels carved on it. John held it to her and opened it. 2 rings, made from a black stone and silver, something from a foreign land far away. Natalie was lost in the moment. She didn't even have to wait for the morbidly obese corpse of a priest, with his belly crawling with worms and other vermin of the dirt, standing behind them to tell them to kiss and to take each other in marriage. She leaned forward for a kiss and felt his cold lips against hers as her skin slowly turned loose and fell apart. and her soul sinking into the dirt below. Thank you for joining me, my Nyctophiliacs. I'll see you soon, and remember to embrace the darkness. Also, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon to get the notifications. And if you're feeling especially kind, share this video on social media. I would like to thank my Patreon supporters and all others who have helped me to get to where I am with my production abilities. Thank you.